Trump claims that the economy is currently booming. However, the OECD says it's definitely not. The OECD, or the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, is an international organization comprised of 38 countries. Among other things, it sets international standards for business conduct, development, and sustainability. It develops policies around economic growth, and it collects and analyzes data and conducts research aimed at understanding and supporting related economic endeavors. So first, let's see the post. Trump said on Truth Social on Monday, "Because of tariffs, our economy is booming." Of course, he offered no empirical evidence to back this claim up. He offered nothing, really. He just said whatever he wanted to say because he is someone who never seems to face any consequences for his words or actions. He lied his way through his first presidential term and then somehow managed to get a second term. Even during the 4 years he was out of office, his supporters never waned in their support. So he posted this on Tuesday, and a few hours later, the OECD released a forecast that predicted global economic growth in 2025 will slow to 2.9% compared to 3.3% in 2024. In the US, predicted economic growth is at 1.6% for 2025, down from 2.8% last year pre-tariffs. And we all know that in a capitalist system, growth isn't allowed to slow down, even though fluctuations and cyclical patterns in all other aspects of life are not only normal, they're necessary. But capitalism is man-made, it's not natural, so it's not allowed to follow typical laws of nature. It still does. We still have regressions and contractions and recessions and depressions, but people are never happy about it. To make things worse, in case any Trump supporters were thinking that even if these predictions were true, none of this has anything to do with Trump's tariffs, somehow, the OECD's economists called out Trump's tariffs specifically as the primary explanation for the slowed economic growth. DOGE isn't helping either here in the US. Another contributing factor to our dismal outlook is our now much smaller federal workforce. When looking out to next year, some OECD countries are expected to recover some growth, but the US isn't one of them. Our growth continues to slow in 2026, down from 1.6% to 1.5%. Moreover, things could get even worse for us than what's already expected. These predictions don't take into account retaliatory tariffs that other nations might impose on the US. While Trump's tariff policy remains in place, even as it faces opposition from the courts, the economic future of our country and the globe remains volatile. Still, Trump can just go on Truth Social and assure his supporters, because only his supporters are on Truth Social, that everything is just fine. Not only is everything fine, it's booming. Things are great. Never mind the fact that you can't afford anything at your local grocery store anymore. I went last week and I swear every time you pick something up, it's $5. And I get that, personally, I tend to be willing to spend a little bit more on the good stuff, at least when it comes to my food, but $5 for almost every item in my cart is ridiculous. Of course, I know that there are other reasons as to why grocery store prices are higher than they probably should be, but for Trump's average supporter, they usually don't look too much into things like corporate greed or artificial price inflation. They see higher prices and they just blame the Democrats. They're probably still blaming Joe Biden for whatever financial discomfort that they may be experiencing, which normally wouldn't actually be too nonsensical, considering that economic impacts of presidential policies, they do tend to lag. But when you have a brand new president who has deliberately manipulated the global market with unprecedented, sweeping, on-again, off-again taco tariffs, it's really hard to pin the current economic turmoil on the Biden administration, unless you're just too MAGA to think outside of that existing belief system. MAGA is a religion at this point in that it limits the scope of thought exploration to dogmatic parameters. Thinking outside of the prescribed box is practically heretical, or in this case, treasonous. But speaking of treasonous thought, It was recently revealed that the Trump administration is planning to create a national citizen database full of everyone's personal data in partnership with the tech firm Palantir. Palantir, nobody reads or watches Lord of the Rings anymore, and it shows. Because of course the government would use a company called Palantir to spy on its own citizens. Of course, Peter Thiel, who has been a longtime supporter of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, would weaponize his company against U.S. citizens in alliance with our own government.
And so even though I believe technology is the way out, and even though I think politics is bad and voting is bad, the one caveat is that we have to be very sensitive to the degree to which politics has been constraining technology, and in which the race is closer than we might like. We might like it just to be winning automatically, but I think it is actually a very, very close race.
But Trump supporters either didn't see the writing on the wall this whole time, or they really thought that they would be exempt from presidential policies just because they voted for Trump. And for once, it seems as though they're catching on to the fact that this guy is not now, nor has he ever been, who they thought he was. From Newsweek, the reactions from Trump supporters reflected growing unease within conservative circles, indicating a rare rupture between the president and key segments of his constituency. The controversy underscores nationwide anxieties around privacy, civil liberties, and the growing influence of technology firms over personal information management. Backlash to the news within the MAGA sphere has felt like a bunch of children learning that Santa Claus is not real. Some Trump-supporting accounts on X claim that this is not what they voted for when they voted for Trump, but they were totally fine with ICE tracking down and surveilling people who they were told, without any supporting evidence, were terrorists and gang members and violent criminals. They were also okay with the Republican Texas governor monitoring the license plates on women's cars lest they try to flee the state's regressive policies surrounding women's health. So there's quite a few of these, but I think it's important to hear and see what's happening here. Part of this feels indulgent, part of this feels validating, but either way, I'm not happy that any of us had to go through any of this. Maybe this is the great awakening that the right's always talking about. Maybe it's just presenting itself differently than they imagined it would. Maybe they needed to be dumped by their narcissistic boyfriend before realizing who and what he was all along, before acknowledging that they got by a flashy man who promised them the world and delivered a glittering, gilded cage. So far-right Nick Fuentes asked, seriously, if Palantir isn't the deep state, then what is? Another user had this incredible insight a whole decade too late. I'm beginning to think it started when DJT walked down that escalator before 2016. From another, was MAGA a giant psyop? Literally, yes. We saw it, you didn't. And to that, is Trump the same man that he was in 2016, or did I just not see it back then? Last one, the cope is unreal. I voted for Trump, but this is just unacceptable. Trump puts a lot of faith in knowing that he can do and say whatever he wants, and his base will just believe him and support him. But it appears that even they have moments of lucidity where they see through the false promises and the false hopes, when they realize that they have been worshiping a false prophet. But they wanted a king. They believed that Trump was God's imperfect vessel, a chosen one of sorts who was going to come down to the people and fix everything. Trump even told them himself that he alone can fix things. So lucky for them, they didn't even have to think of it for themselves. And they believed him because they wanted to believe him. We don't believe in monarchies here in this country, and yet half of our citizens are waiting for a Messiah to come down from heaven and create a kingdom here on earth. How is that belief system compatible with democracy? We're seeing that in many ways it isn't, because this is how it manifests in the real world. People are more willing to submit to perceived divinity because they think the divine will favor them for their demonstrated loyalty and faith. They're only mad now because they're seeing that MAGA is not exempt from the same things they wished on so many others. It's hard to feel bad for them, but there is some hope in that maybe this is the first step on the road to a post-MAGA world. Wouldn't that be nice? All right, that's it for me. If you got anything out of this, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more. Thanks.